Families had constructed dwellings in the human colony, which had established a peaceful existence far from Earth on a small but lush planet. Schools and a fresh feeling of tranquility apart from the turmoil of interplanetary warfare. The parents smiled at each other while the kids played outside, and they sensed hope that was nearly real. Was brittle, dependent on the caprices of an extraterrestrial empire that had a firm hold over the surrounding galaxies, and then darkness descended upon the skies on a typical day. Overhead, strange ships bearing the scary alien royal family's insignia emerged, causing panic to spread through the settlement, and everyone became terrified when they realized that these were not your typical patrol ships. As the initial explosions reverberated, houses were damaged, structures collapsed, and the once-in-one tiny, cozy house at the edge of the colony, safe haven, descended into pandemonium. Young family members clutched one another, their faces white with disbelief after hearing tales of alien oppression. But the father, a former soldier, had never witnessed anything come this close. He attempted to remain composed. He assured his wife and kids in a steady voice. Even though his hands were shaking together, they started walking towards a neighboring emergency shelter, feeling every step. As they made their way, the weight of dread increased as they realized that escape was practically impossible. Through the confusion, they saw a patrol of extraterrestrial troops wearing dark armor, who were silent and icy. The father moved forward to protect his family, his eyes hardening as he spoke, but his words were interrupted as one of the troops moved forward brandishing a weapon, their gaze uncaring, in her last moments. The mother tried to console her children by holding their hands and whispering her love into the camera. In a matter of seconds, Swift's family lay still on the ground, their lives extinguished. Their bodies stayed there as a solemn warning to anyone who might rebel. Without a moment of mercy, soldiers marched on, disregarding the dead bodies behind them. The incident swiftly spread across the colony, weighing heavily on the emotions of those who saw the horror. Encroaching on every community, leaving no area unexplored, panic turned into sadness as an increasing number of families were destroyed. Some attempted to escape, but every indication of resistance was methodically destroyed by the ruthless alien army, leaving only brief moments of hope. Was gone. Yet in the midst of the destruction, a lone figure appeared out of the shadows. A child from the deceased family had concealed his tiny body in the brush, was shaken and bruised, his eyes fixed on the lights of the place that had been his home. The troops missed him. When the alien ships left, they left him alone among the debris, having completed their ruthless mission in their hurry. The child walked across the shattered terrain, his eyes wide with surprise but also full of a quiet resolve that he knew he couldn't stay. But he also understood that he had to respond to his family's passing at every turn. Heart-hardened rage and grief mingling in equal proportion over time, he eventually arrived at a human outpost, and he recounted a series of tears and agonizing memories that depicted the horror of what he had witnessed. The chill go through those who listened, knowing that word of such cruelty spread quickly through human channels and would not be disregarded. Reaching those with the ability to retaliate, the High Command's reaction to the report was prompt. And without hesitation, this was a demand for action rather than merely an act of assault. Retaliation, and humanity knew the ideal answer. They would send its best. An assassin couple were a pair of agents whose identities were only known in confidential documents and whispered in dimly lit settings, restricted by their deadly abilities and unwavering devotion to their purpose. They had already dealt with the most hazardous missions in human history. They were skilled infiltrators renowned for their effectiveness, fear, and silence. They left behind a brief dossier with details that was presented to the assassins without any ceremony. Each member of the alien royal family they targeted was given a name that served as a sign of the goal was to clearly eradicate the cruelty that Ed imposed on innocent lives. Each of them eliminates the foundations of the government that permitted such atrocities to occur. The assassins examined the goal in silence. With unreadable facial expressions but unwavering focus, there wouldn't be any speeches or words of comfort was shared, but there was a kinship that was stronger than words because they understood the stakes. They accepted the course they were going to take with complete knowledge that their actions would be more powerful than any declaration of war, and preparations got underway right away with carefully chosen alien language codes and precision weapon disguises were collected. As they developed a strategy that would lead them far into enemy territory, every component came together. They cooperated, coordinating their motions with the familiar ease of people who had trained together for years. No detail was missed, and no time was wasted. Their goal was more than merely conversely. It was intended to convey the idea that humanity will never submit to the assassin's brutality or terror. As they were getting ready, they briefly thought about the family whose death had prompted this mission, but they were unaware of it. Their names and had never met them, but they somehow sympathized with their suffering. They carried that recollection like a secret fire, because assassins themselves had previously lost a lot to the caprices of evil forces. In a sense, this mission was personal, which strengthened their resolve, was retaliation for justice and a warning to anyone who tried to challenge humanity's commitment. When it was time to depart, they did so quietly, vanishing into the darkness with only a brief note. Their objective was to leave a legacy for those who had been lost and for those who will cross their way. Obviously declared war on the wrong species by the alien royal family, and the assassins would be humanity's swift and unrelenting response. With every step, the shadows would go towards their goal. A silent but devastating reckoning would sweep through the alien empire. Every human life lost, every family broken, and every kid abandoned was carried by the assassins to their mission. They had a task and didn't need words for speeches or declarations. The assassins, identified solely by their call, have a singular, unbreakable commitment and a goal. And confidential information were unparalleled in their abilities, feared for their surgical precision and brutality. Were a duo known as the Shadows, bound by years of unrelenting training and a silent yet fierce devotion to one another. For those who were aware of them, their reputation was both lethal and elusive. Completed space missions that eliminated human risks with a cold deficit that left no trace. When the mission details reached them, they required no explanation or motivation, just terror and quiet. Of every act of violence, every innocent life lost, and the assault on the human colony, everything been carefully recorded in the briefing, and the two of them reviewed the report without using any word processing software. The brutal every picture of the alien royal family's brutality and every story of casualties strengthened their determination to target the list was unambiguous. Destroy every member of the alien loyal family who approved the attack, cutting the head of the repressive government that had attacked without any mercy. The briefing described the extraterrestrial family, a strong dynasty with intricate internal politics, where each member has a high command had determined which individuals were most crucial to remove from their positions that were essential to the empire's governance. Every passing of the reigning monarch to the younger heirs is a devastating blow to the empire's organization, the royal families. High leadership thought that the empire operated on terror, which was maintained by swiftly and brutally suppressing resistance. That no other human world will experience the same destiny unless this line was completely eradicated. Assassins started their meticulous and thorough preparations by reviewing and learning about alien culture and traditions. To blend in with an unfamiliar society without being recognized, individuals must use gestures, greetings, and even minor dialectal variations. Examined planetary routes, architectural blueprints, and maps, examining each route they would need to arrive at the royal palace via each escape route in the event of an emergency. And the locations where they could vanish if they were found. The specifics were ingrained in their mind with unflinching concentration, and their weapons were each one is carefully chosen and optimized for both close combat and long-range attacks. Components selected with the mission's accuracy in mind, they modified their equipment to be versatile, silent, and lethal. Each weapon, in addition to their arsenal of skills, comprised advanced stealth devices, tiny bombs, and manipulation tools that are carefully packaged and camouflaged as commonplace items. These tools came naturally to them, and their proficiency enabled them to use them with a serenity that had hitherto. Their disguises, which they had acquired during years of lethal operations, were essential to the task because the alien home world was on high alert. Its residents were continuously observed, and they chose attire and accessories that would blend in well. Each piece is made to look like a normal traveler using local fashion. They received training in alien speech patterns, which involved changing their gestures, voices, and even every aspect of their postures was planned to assist them fit in with the alien royals' customs and mannerisms. The two exchanged subtle signals and silent nods to make their surroundings undetectable in plain sight. Unspoken language they had created together over the years, and their gestures reflected their mutual trust and comprehension that had been established over innumerable missions, each preparation step. And each quiet nod, their gaze confirmed their common objective and their unshakable bond. They didn't need to use words to communicate their connection. More robust than that, based on the respect of two individuals who were more familiar with one another's advantages and disadvantages. More thoroughly than anybody else, going over the details of the alien security procedures and examining each checkpoint. They observed the patrol route and guard shift scheduling surrounding the royal palace, noting high security areas and locations where. Less emphasis was placed on monitoring, and their strategy involved precisely timing each mission component. Make sure that every motion is precise, calculated, and error-free. Mentally planned out the entire operation, with each stage representing a step that would move them closer to their goals. Authorities' orders were clear and left no room for alarms to sound. Survivors had to completely disassemble the royal family as part of the job, which was a difficult, and from the oldest king to the youngest heir, every target had to be carefully destroyed. As they absorbed these instructions, the assassins' expressions remained expressionless. This mission was a responsibility and a response. They agreed to the pledge made to injustice that humanity would not remain silent while its people were killed. Accountability with the same unassuming resolve that had steered each mission they had ever finished. They made their last preparations in solitude, carefully considering every move and acting without hesitation because they knew exactly what they were doing. That with the alien royal family encircled by multiple levels of protection, this mission would be among their most hazardous. Each was made to shield the rulers from every possible danger, but the assassins had already encountered overwhelming odds and they moved knowing the stakes were high and that failure was not an option because the task required a perfect execution. As they finished the last preparations, they permitted taking a minute to stop and gaze at each other with a common awareness that this mission was different from any they had taken on, and they were aware that they weren't only seeking revenge on one family because the stakes were so personal. They were making it plain that humanity would not survive by retaliating for every human life that the alien regime had stolen. Silent in the face of oppression, their goal was to warn those who think they are above reproach that when it came time to depart, humanity's spirit could not be broken, and they slid away silently, their faces concealed in the shadows. Their footsteps were quiet, and they were aware that by the time the extraterrestrial royal family recognized they were in danger, but the assassins would arrive on the scene too late. Under the shadow of darkness, their ship was subtly blending into the surroundings on the alien home world. Concealed a silent, inconspicuous model that the aliens didn't notice. The bustle of daily life filled the highly populated civilization, although its residents were continuously. Every move in this city was observed, and every outsider closely examined the assassins' movements. Through this tight environment with deliberate calmness in their actions to prevent raising suspicions while disguising themselves as visitors blended in with the natives, moving in unison and keeping just the same distance. Sufficient separation to prevent the alien language from being perceived as a pair that is so foreign in its they now spoke in it when needed, their accents flawless, and cadence and tone came easy to them. They were adept at navigating public areas because to years of training learning foreign accents and cultural quirks. Their main goal in this first phase was to match the locals' pace and mimic their restrained manner. Phase involved obtaining intelligence and identifying vulnerabilities in the royal palace's security system. The palace was a tall fortress surrounded by several levels of defenses in the center of the city, and guards patrolled the perimeter. Every approach was observed by covert cameras and advanced scanners that kept an eye on movement. The assassins knew the palace layout by heart, but they had to confirm the security measures they saw in real time without violating. Their steps, taking note of each pattern, guard change, and surveillance perspective, they located a modest spot to stay that gave them a sense of privacy, while allowing them to from this position. They had a clear view over the central area of the city and observed the every step was committed to memory, with the palace recording changes in guard routines and any anomalies in security patterns. The couple mostly used subtle gestures and hardly spoke, with each observation serving as a fragment of the bigger idea that was developing in their imaginations. In silent communication, each attentive to the smallest movement of the other, they proceeded to engage with lower-class residents of the city have access to local businesses, public squares, and markets where foreigners acquired knowledge of local rumors in order to extract any information that could be helpful in breaking into the palace. Whilst through informal conversations, they learned about the latest conflicts inside the royal family. That could reveal internal disputes or flaws in each piece of data was digested and looked at for any possible benefits during one of these outings. They discovered a significant flaw. A little-known door that palace employees used had less security than. The guards stationed at the main entrances were fewer and rotated less often, providing a window of the assassins identified this gate as a possible site of entry. And they were mentally calculating how they had to make sure their timing was ideal in order to take advantage of this weakness and strike when the guards were least expecting it. In order to reduce the hazards to the palace, They carefully examined and modified their strategy every day, recalculating every aspect. Security was intended to fend off massive assaults rather than the exact covert infiltration in which they were experts. Their advantage was their capacity to move covertly and get past defenses that used force and overwhelming numbers. They were aware that every second would matter once they were inside. They studied the palace's interior and committed every key door to memory, requiring complete concentration and synchronization. The palace was large and expansive, with numerous staircases and secret passageways. Each chamber was more lavish than the one before it, and their arrangement was meant to frighten and disorientation, intended to cause intruders to become disoriented before they even arrived at the royal family's rooms. However, the assassins were ready at every turn and were memorized every path that could be taken. As they watched closely, they saw certain senior officials coming and going from the palace on a regular basis. Through the side door, suggesting that this path might potentially grant access to delicate regions within they identified these authorities as possible tools whom they might pose as a remove if needed. They were thorough in their attention to detail, with each component contributing to the complex jigsaw they were putting together. Additionally, they examined possible escape routes and backup plans in case something went wrong, but they didn't intend to withdraw since they were aware that the mission's complexity necessitated the use of secret alleyways. There were side streets and subterranean tunnels identified, each of which provided a possible escape route in case the mission take a surprising diversion through this metropolis with all of its busy activities and secret spots. Developed a mental map of escape routes, and following days of meticulous planning and observation, they felt prepared to test the defenses. They started by taking down a minor royal without raising any red flags, a move that would determine the response time in palace security protocols. The death would seem to be an accident intended to evade the examination of palace guards, was a well-thought-out move intended to delve into the palace's defenses without indicating their existence. The minor royal, a person with minimal importance in the empire's structure, was designated for his death was intended to convey a subliminal but unnerving message. A message to the palace that the royal family was all within reach as they carried out this stage of their strategy with precision, leaving no signs or evidence of their nevertheless. The cause of death appeared to be a simple accident, leaving the extraterrestrial authorities perplexed. Served as a test and a prelude to the greater mission ahead, a means of subtly announcing that the human reaction had already started. The palace's first response was one of perplexity rather than worry as the junior royal's death was handled. As a regrettable incident with mostly unaltered security procedures, this response validated what the palace was not yet aware of: the danger the couple posed within its borders, as the assassins had predicted. Successfully put the defenses to the test and gained insightful knowledge about the response patterns without sacrificing. After completing this initial phase of their mission, the assassins withdrew to hone their strategy and assess the outcomes of their activities. Each new fact broadened their comprehension of the palace's interior workings that gave them a better idea of how to move forward, and the guards remained vigilant. Although the surveillance systems were sophisticated, they were not impenetrable. Felt the mission coming together into a smooth plan, with every element fitting precisely as they got ready. They were quietly satisfied with the royal family's continued. The assassins understood that, as they went about their regular lives inside the fortress walls, they were unaware of the impending storm. The palace's defenses would soon be without safety or sanctuary within their walls. Even though they were complex, they were unable to match the precision and competence they were going to exhibit because they knew their next. The timing is adjusted to ensure that every motion is perfectly timed. Each step has been meticulously designed to take advantage of every weakness and opening in the alien empire's ostensibly formidable. Eventually, the stage was prepared, the last details were finished, and the shadows had the assassins began their strategy with surgical precision, entering the center of the enemy's power. In complete stillness, they had already designated every target in the palace with each. The daily routine of royal members was ingrained in their heads, and their approach was straightforward: kill each target quickly, leave no trace, and created anxiety throughout the empire. The first royal was a mid-level official who was the monarch's relative. The assassin quickly struck numerous family members, leaving no trace of resistance or alarm. The palace guards found the body shortly after the silent end that caused calm confusion, although there was no clear reason why they were unnerved yet unable to explain death, which they felt had a natural cause. Although security was kept on guard, no official investigation was conducted. The exact result the assassins had hoped for: an inexplicable death that raised doubts without raising alerts with every attack, which the assassins took advantage of by using it as a barrier to avoid detection. Their next target was a senior advisor in the family who was powerful and extremely because of his role. He was trusted by the royal court, which made him an ideal target. Followed him through the palace's twisting halls, disappearing into the shadows to wait for the ideal moment. When he eventually managed to elude his guards, they acted quickly to eliminate him. The death was made it seem as though he had just passed out in his chambers, another enigmatic incident with no obvious explanation. By the time the word got out, the royal family was feeling anxious, and the guards were whispering curses. Invisible adversaries and malicious omens, but no real security danger has been found. Procedures stayed mostly the same, and the assassins exploited this expanding paranoia, gave the family members a psychological edge that made every subsequent attack increasingly simpler. Secluded, with every loss making them more terrified and their routines more as expected, the third target was a younger family member who was still prominent despite being a distant relative. His removal would send a clear message to those who support the royal family, according to his connections in the empire's military. The assassins took their time to make sure that the family had control over the colonies. Death would be especially disturbing, so they meticulously arranged it, leaving him in a condition that suggested an assailant's existence, but without any concrete proof. This sowed the seeds of fear in the household, making them wonder just how near the royal family's threat actually was. Anxiety turned into intense horror, and they were unable to ignore these fatalities as coincidentally, the family members restricted themselves to the most guarded chambers in the palace, and the guards were doubled. The assassin benefited greatly from this enhanced security, since it made each target simpler to find. With fewer the family members' public appearances turned them become captives in their own palace, making their schedules even more standardized compared to earlier. The royal family's paranoia increased with every death, and they started to accuse one another out of internal betrayal and became suspicious of their own advisors and staff. By further isolating themselves, the assassins were able to sow discord among their targets. Without doing anything, the once powerful dynasty was tearing its members apart, undermining the family's unity. Divided by mistrust, terror, and the constant feeling that death was imminent, assassin's next target was the younger sibling of the monarch, a powerful person with significant prominence within the empire. Hence, his removal would be a devastating blow that would mark the start of the end. They waited in the shadows, observing him as he passed from chamber to chamber on his way to the royal line. The assassin's perfect timing and taut, terrified visage made his death as untraceable as the for others. The message was clear: no rank or significance could shield anyone from the coming vengeance. The monarch's siblings' deaths destroyed any last calm in the family. The palace exploded with guards running around. Every fatality had undermined efforts to barricade exits, block off passages, and intensify security surrounding the remaining royals. The family's trust, and now when they were overcome by panic, they pulled back, further isolating themselves in inner chambers that were inaccessible to even their closest advisors. But as the last phase of their scheme, assassins expected this to happen. With each target dispatched the assassins and advanced farther inside the palace. Each move characterized by unwavering precision. Each stride forward caused waves of anxiety, and the attack was as much as psychological as a physical blow. The assassin's work was methodical in dismantling the power, and it permeated every level of the royal family. Structure from within, demonstrating that there was no shelter from their vengeance even in the most guarded palace. There were still some royals who were completely alone and clinging tightly to the remnants of their power. Fear and suspicion had distorted their thoughts, preventing them from communicating with the outside world. The assassins had transformed the guards, now turned the palace into a trap by using the family's own fortress against them. Disorganized and overburdened, they were unable to launch a coordinated defense. The power of the empire was eroding gradually due to the influence of an adversary they were unable to see, hear, or as the climax drew closer, the assassins moved with the quiet assurance of those who had previously. Every royal who fell was one who had won their steps, which were defined by the road of justice. One less representation of the harsh authority of the empire, one less cord tying humanity together. The assassins weren't just killing people. They were destroying a whole system of terror and control. Each murder served as a declaration and a reminder that the brutality of the empire would no longer be tolerated until the final. Despite the royal guard's attempts to reorganize, the assassins persisted with their task, which was almost finished. Constructed by carefully removing the people in charge of the once powerful empire's center, not by using brute force. And the few surviving royals were stuck in a hollow shell that had lost its invulnerability. They were only shadows of their former selves, waiting for the inevitable in the silence that came from fear and desperation. As the assassins proceeded to seize their last targets, they were ready to complete the job. They had destroyed every line of defense, stripped away every layer of security, and left the royal family alone and without allies. Powerless was their goal, and the complete overthrow of the empire's ruling class was the result of their mission. The royals had considered themselves above justice and untouchable, but now they have an answer for each innocent life lost. Understood that every time the assassins moved, they were just as vulnerable as everyone else. Was one step closer to completion, each royal's mission was almost finished. The echoes of their deeds served as a reminder that humanity would not be subjugated without repercussions. Would Resound's presence far beyond this palace serve as both a warning to those who would threaten it and a monument to human tenacity? The assassins had no question that they had arrived at the alien habitat as they got closer to their final targets. World with a single goal, and the Empire's rule has now achieved that goal. Of terror was over, its legacy was left in ruins, and the mission's last phase had came with the other members of the royal family concealed in the palace's most safe area following the assassin series of, with their previously unwavering confidence. Just a small number of members were left. And they were all now confined to the throne room. Shattered, the assassins were aware that this final act would provide the ultimate strike that would terminate the Empire's reign. Would permanently negate the royal line's influence. They had come to complete what they had begun, and there would be no reluctance. The throne room was a castle inside a castle, with layers of defenses built to fend off any known force. The guards here were extremely skilled, trained and devoted to the death. But the assassins had used Brute's technique to completely destroy the palace. Force. Now that the majority of the guards have left, or are confused by the ongoing losses, the assassins proceeded deliberately, their attention unwavering, knowing that the royal room's defenses were more vulnerable than before. Recognized their mission's last stages required extreme accuracy, and as they drew closer, they could sense the anxiety in the air. The surviving royals were frightened and devoid of their customary haughtiness, knowing that their demise was the royal family gathered in quiet within the throne room. Their eyes wide and faces pale, knowing that they had heard that something unstoppable was approaching, and the whispers had seen their numbers dwindle, leaving them with nowhere to. They were forced to this point by the assassins, who calculated every action to get them to this precise moment of realizing that the assassin's strategy was quick and strategic. They passed past the final obstacles with ease. Every choice made during the last stages of getting ready for the impending encounter, they were now within reach of the top officials in the Empire, who were in charge of the numerous lives were subjected to unending pain by the royals, who were formerly in charge of intimidation, now had to contend with an adversary that was more steadfast, fearless, and near than before. The few surviving royals were met by the assassins in the throne room, and they stared back in terror, and the assassin's presence served as a sobering reminder that there are no barriers and no security. And there was nothing that could protect them from justice. The room was silent, and there was an inevitable conclusion. Before all they had constructed collapsed, they had a flash of insight and noticed a reflection of the one by one. The royals perished, their deaths coming to an end as silently and peacefully as possible. The assassins moved as quickly as those they had stolen from others, emotionless in every move, precise in its conclusion, and ruthless. The royal family's authority was totally taken away at this point, leaving only the relics of their former supreme authority. The assassins never focused on a single victim. Instead, each action was a component of a bigger scheme. Every mission hit was a component of the final strategy they had meticulously planned, and the royal room was once a symbol. Silence had replaced the dynasty's ironclad authority, and the assassins stood among the royal family once feared the ruins of power, knowing that their mission had finally come to an end. Galaxy's future was destroyed in a succession of silent, purposeful actions. With each move and action, they were the last ones remaining after their objective was accomplished, and their prepared strike had been for this very moment. In order to make sure that their activities would have a lasting impact, the assassins shifted their attention to the final phase. They moved this palace with a silent intent, leaving behind vestiges of symbols. It would stand as a cautionary tale to anyone who dared to oppose humanity once more. Their labor here was not merely an act of vengeance, was a declaration that demonstrated the tenacity and unwavering character of the tyrannical heritage of the royal family would be buried here beneath the memory of their species. of what had transpired here. The assassins walked through the palace after leaving the throne room. Corridors one final look at the deserted halls they'd passed through just hours before the silence was uttered. The sovereignty of the empire had been overthrown, but not by an army, in sharp contrast to the strength that formerly emanated from these walls. However, by delivering their message with calm, unwavering resolve, two figures moving in perfect unison demonstrated that no empire was untouchable, and even the strongest powers may collapse. The assassins slipped away from the palace, passing through the city's streets, were as silent as their entry. Unnoticed, their mission's effects will quickly spread throughout the empire, reaching every nook and cranny, leaving no one. They had transformed the palace from a symbol of oppression to one of empowerment, unfazed by the news of the royal family's downfall. Liberation serves as a reminder that those who exercise cruel authority would eventually have to deal with the fallout from their deeds, as when they arrived to the city's outskirts, they paused for one last time to gaze back at the far-off palace. The assassins realized that their stately towers were suddenly quiet and their hallways were deserted. Activities that would reshape the galaxy's power dynamics for generations, affecting those who had previously lived under. The monarchy of the royal family would be free to follow their own course without being constrained by the specter of oppression. This was the enduring legacy of their mission. After they left, the assassins went back to their ship. Slipping back into the shadows and abandoning the foreign world, they brought with them the understanding that they had achieved their goal of bringing justice to those who had perished and making sure that nobody would experience the same destiny once more since. Despite their silence, their deeds had changed the course of history, bringing an end to when the stars passed outside the windows of their ship, marking the end of an era of oppression and the start of something new. Let themselves a brief period of introspection, they had fulfilled a mission that went beyond retaliation and personal benefit, had defended those unable to defend themselves against an empire that thought it was impregnable. Objective was now complete, and their role in this drama was over, yet the narrative would still be influenced by what, without saying a word, they went back to their roles with renewed attention. More about the challenges that were ahead of them after completing this mission, they sent a message to humanity in the galaxy, that the assassins had left their mark not only on an empire but also on the idea of what it meant to be a power. It meant standing up to oppression, and they felt their mission had been accomplished in the quiet that followed.